Code generation will take your Flutter app development process to the next level. In this video, you'll learn how to use freeze to generate data classes and unions to greatly reduce the amount of boilerplate code in your apps. If you enjoy the video, remember to leave a like and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel. For access to step-by-step Flutter courses, consider becoming a pro member at launchclub.io. And with that, let's get into it. So you're probably used to writing classes like this. Here we have a user class with a string name and integer age. If we wanted to compare two users, we'd have to override the equals equals operator and hash code, which gets pretty tedious to write as we add more fields to our class. That's where the Equatable package comes in. Let's add Equatable to our pubspec.yaml. We only have to extend Equatable and define a props getter to automatically override equals equals and hash code. But our class isn't done yet. Because our class is immutable or cannot be changed, we have to add a copyWith method to easily modify values by creating a new instance of our class. Note that this copyWith doesn't support assigning null to values because of the null-aware operator. When copyWith is called, you can see only the age modified in copyWith is changed. The name stayed the same. Finally, our user class might have toJson and fromJson methods, converting your class into mapstring dynamic and back into user respectively. Now let's be real. This is a pain to write for every single data class we make, and it only gets worse as we add more fields. Luckily, we have two solutions. The first solution is to use a VSCode extension called dart data class generator, which will generate the code for us. We can change the way the class is generated in our VSCode settings. All we have to do is define a class with the fields we want. Hover your cursor over a field, tap Command period on Mac or Control period on Windows, and select Generate Data Class. And now we have our class. The second solution is to use a code generation package like freezed. Just like Dart data class generator, freezed in combination with some other packages will handle equality, copyWith, toJson, and fromJson for us. CopyWith will also be able to handle nullable values. Freezed isn't limited to generating data classes though. It also has another awesome feature called unions that save us a lot of time, which we'll get into later. First, let's add freezed annotation, and build runner to our pubspec dev dependencies and run flutter pubget. Let's make the same user class we made at the beginning of the video. Import freezed annotation at the top of the file and then write part usermodel.freeze.dart. It's very important that the .freeze.dart file's name is the same as the file we're in, or else our code won't generate properly. From here, we write class user with $user and add a freeze decorator. The freeze decorator and $user are syntax that freezed uses to generate code. Instead of defining each field as final type name, we define a constructor with fields and their types. You can mark fields as required or nullable. To generate code, we type in our terminal flutter pub run build_runner watch --delete -conflicting -outputs. This will run in the background so all code gen related files will regenerate whenever we modify or save a file. Usermodel.freeze.dart was generated. To disable any linter warnings and errors in generated files, add these lines into your analysis options.yaml file. When we test out our user class, we have equality and copyWith, but we're missing a toJson and fromJson. In order to generate these two methods, we have to add the JSON annotation package to dependencies and the JSON serializable package to our dev dependencies. In the user class, add part usermodel.g.dart and add a new factory constructor called fromJson that returns $user fromJson JSON. Once we save, the generated file is automatically updated with to and fromJsons that we can use. Next, let's look at how to make a custom method in our freeze class. This is useful if we ever need to add custom functionality to our data class, such as converting values to Firestore values like timestamp, or converting Firestore document snapshots back into our model. By adding a private constant user constructor, we're able to write custom methods. For fun, let's return the user's name multiplied by their age. After a few seconds, we can now use our new method. When you're building out data classes in your app, it's common for them to have relationships with each other. Create a new file called job model, import freezed annotation, and add parts for the freezed and g files. Each job has a string title and int level, where the title defaults to software engineer. Add the fromJson factory constructor for to and fromJson. We want our user model to also have a list of jobs field, so we can insert that into our constructor. Let's assign a job to our user and call toJson. When we look at the result, we see mapStringDynamic contains our job object still. To serialize nested lists of freezed objects, we have to add @JSON_serializable explicit toJson true above our user constructor. Run it again, and it works. So we covered creating data classes in Dart. Let's move on to unions. A union, or sealed class, has several but fixed types. I'm going to show you a practical example of using unions with Bloc. If you're unfamiliar with Bloc, or business logic component, all you need to know is that when our user interacts with our UI, events are sent to the block. The block then takes these events and performs some business logic, sending new states back to the UI. The UI renders different widgets based on the state. I've imported Flutter Bloc into the project and changed the counter example to use Bloc. When the user taps on the increment button, a counter increment event is sent to the block, a loading state is emitted, showing a circular progress indicator, and the counter is incremented. When the user taps on the reset button, a counter reset event is sent to the block, and the block resets the counter back to 0. The counter text widget watches the state and renders UI accordingly. To use freeze with Bloc, we'll edit the event file first. Instead of defining the events and extending the abstract class, we can use freeze to clean this up with a union and return factory constructors. Make sure the constructors are not private, so we're able to handle them in our block. Since counter event is part of counter block, we import freeze annotation into the counter block and add part counterblock.freeze.dart. The counter state has 3 states: initial, loading, and loaded. We'll make 3 factory constructors. In the loaded state, we expect to show an integer, so it takes in an integer field. Let's fix up our block with the new states. And change the counter event to use factory constructors. Thanks to pattern matching, we can make this code a lot easier to read. First, watch the state, and then use when to render different UI based on the current state. For initial, show a centered Flutter logo. For loading, show a circular progress indicator. And for loaded, show the counter text. And that's all we have to do. Using freezed unions to generate our block state and event files saved us a lot of time because we didn't have to write any block boilerplate code. In this example, we only used when for pattern matching, but there's also maybe when, map, and maybe map you can use depending on the situation. In this video, you learned how to generate data classes, create unions, and utilize unions in your blocks. I hope you incorporate freeze into your own Flutter projects to save yourself a lot of development time. Remember to leave a like and subscribe, and check out my Flutter courses on launchclub.io. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.